Welcome to everybody to this last panel of the day. Particular welcome to the ministers. The ministers are actually on a road show together. They were just in Bonn last week. Minister Freeland was in Washington. Minister Videgaray is going down tomorrow. So they've become fast friends over a number of very important issues. Thank you very much for being here today. We know, Minister Freeland, you carved out time specially to do this from an otherwise already packed agenda. And Minister Videgaray, the minute you heard about this conference, you said, I'll be on a plane and come up to attend. And so we appreciate that very much. Thank you. Going back to the idea of just being in Washington, I wonder if I could start by asking each of you, in your time there, obviously Minister Freeland, you just came back and did meet in meetings with the President, or certainly the Prime Minister was. Mr. Videgaray, you haven't yet met with President Trump, but you've met with Cabinet Secretaries and will be doing it again. Perhaps I could ask each of you, what have you heard? What were your takeaways from your meetings in Washington, and what are your impressions?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you very much, Ken, for hosting this, and Luis. And I don't think Ildefonso is here, but I wanted really to start by welcoming Luis, Ildefonso, all of our Mexican visitors. Bienvenue au Canada, bienvenue à Toronto. C'est un très grand plaisir pour moi que vous êtes ici, et ce sera un plaisir de parler avec vous cet après-midi. It really is a great opportunity to continue building on our relationship with Mexico, which really was so strongly reinforced with the state visit we had in June. And as Ken says, I've been working a lot with Luis. We were at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Bonn together, and Ildefonso, the economy minister, who I think people heard from earlier today, is a good friend of mine because we worked together as trade ministers on the Pacific Alliance and TPP issues. So it's great to have this opportunity to build on our partnership. On Washington, Ken, you know, I think Canadians are very familiar with the results of the day that we spent there last Monday, 8 days ago. It was all very, very clear in the press conference. It was a good day. It was a good meeting in the White House with the President, with the Vice President, with Cabinet Secretaries, and we had good meetings with Speaker Ryan and with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I think the really key conclusion, I would say there were sort of two key elements for Canada from that meeting. The first was an opportunity to continue building on and to reinforce the lines of communication and the personal relationships that our government is building with the U.S. government, very much including the legislative branch. And we were able to continue to do that in Bonn with the foreign ministers. My colleague Harj Sajjan was in Europe last week as well, where Secretary Mattis was, also the Vice President, also Secretary Tillerson. So we're spending time with our American counterparts, getting to know each other, and that's really important right now. And then, obviously, very important for us, and a core part of my mandate is working on and strengthening the Canada-U.S. economic relationship. We talked about that a lot in Washington, and I think everyone heard the strong endorsement from the President of the United States of the strength and value of that relationship. So that was good for us all to hear.
If I could just do a follow-up before Mr. Videgaray. You know, it was clear from the communique and the press conference that the bilateral relationship is very healthy, and Canada comes away from that feeling very good about where that's headed. What did you hear about the trilateral relationship in your time in Washington?
Well, that was a bilateral meeting. That was not a trilateral conversation. So our real focus when we were in Washington was on talking, as in all bilateral meetings, was on talking about our bilateral relationship. As I said at the beginning, I'm very glad that Luis is here. I'm very glad that Ildefonso is here, and we're going to spend some time this afternoon talking about our bilateral relationship and obviously talking about NAFTA. Canada and Mexico have a strong bilateral partnership, and crucially, we're both members of NAFTA, which our government is strongly committed to. We think that NAFTA has brought tremendous economic benefits to Canada, and we're keen to continue working with our NAFTA partners to continue that economic relationship.
Thank you, Ken. First of all, thank you for the to the Canadian Council of the Americas for inviting us. It's a privilege to be here in Toronto. Even if it's February, it's always good to be here.
It's actually warm, Luis. It's warm today.
Yeah, for Mexico City standards, it's not warm, okay? Yeah, but it's great to be here. Thank you, Chrystia. We're seeing a lot of each other now, which is a really good thing, not only for me, but for the relationship, so I embrace that. And we look forward to working very closely, and we will work very closely. On your question, Ken, on Washington, you all know by now that the Mexican government and the U.S. government have very public, very open differences. That's very public. But what people don't know that much, and it's perhaps underestimated, is how strong and how frequent is the communication between the new administration and the Mexican government. We talk every week. I've been in Washington already twice since President Trump was inaugurated. I was there talking to senior officials at the White House. I already met in Washington with Secretary Tillerson once. We spent some time together in Bonn last week, and tomorrow Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Kelly of Homeland Security are flying into Mexico City, and we'll spend a couple of days working with them in Mexico City. And this is something that will continue. And the reason for that, first, is because we agree on that. In the last call between President Trump and President Peña Nieto, it was an agreement that we will continue to talk and to talk about all different issues in this complex, very deep relationship between Mexico and the U.S. So that's the agreement, and that's what we're doing. But we're also talking, and we continue to work together because that's in our best interest. It's in the best interest of Mexico, and it's in the best interest of the U.S. We all understand how important the U.S. is to Mexico. But let's not forget also how important is Mexico to the U.S. Trade-wise, we're a big market, and many people's jobs in the U.S. depend on the ability to access the Mexican market, from agriculture to sophisticated manufacturing. In many regions, not only Texas or Arizona, but even in states like Michigan, where according to Michigan's government, roughly 170,000 jobs depend on the ability to export into Mexico from Michigan. But it's not only about trade, also in issues about our joint challenges about security, immigration, which is very different from what it was just 10 years ago throughout the region, including flows from Central America, and also on threats like terrorism, where we present a united front and we collaborate every day. So there are many reasons why the U.S.-Mexico relationship will be sorted out. We'll work it out, and we'll work it out in a way that is constructive and positive for both countries. It's got to be a win-win for both countries. This is not a zero-sum game, and that's the way we're approaching things. Regarding trade, of course, one of our principles is that this is a trilateral matter because we are part of a regional agreement, and we're very proud of being part of a regional agreement. And when it comes to trade, this is a three partners conversation, and will continue to be a three partners conversation. Of course, we have our many bilateral issues with the U.S., some of which Canada, I'm sure, is glad not to be part of. And we also have, and let's not keep that out of sight, we also have some important bilateral issues between Mexico and Canada. And that's also a bilateral relationship, and Christy and I will be spending some time together later talking about those, because this is an important relationship on itself. So we'll continue to work. But I think that people should not lose sight of how close, how constructive is their relationship these days.
Did you want to comment on that?
No, no.
If I could do a follow-up to that, to what extent are the discussions bifurcated between the economic discussions going on, which have a certain tenor to them, as you alluded to, and the other overarching political issues? You talked about security, there's immigration issues, all the other issues that aren't trade per se. Do you see those operating on two separate tracks with the United States? It seems to me that the tact of Mexico is to say, if we're going to talk about some of it, we're going to talk about it all at once and not segregate one from the other. It's all part of a big discussion.
Well, for us, it's a single conversation because it's one relationship, and all these issues interact. If we think, for instance, about trade, one of the issues that you very quickly run into is logistics. And if you're talking about logistics of trade, then you're talking water issues. And then you're talking very quickly about security. So it's a single conversation. Of course, there are specialists that will be doing trade, and we have, by the way, great trade experts that will be carrying out that. And also we have our people in government in charge of security and in charge of immigration control and all that. And it's going to be a set of working groups, but it's the same conversation. And by the way, it's part of the job of the foreign minister is to make sure that is a single conversation that is coherent and serves a single purpose, which is, from our point of view, the best interest of the Mexican people. And I'm sure that's the same job from our U.S. and Canadian counterparts.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Freeland, where do you think the greatest points of trilateral cooperation can be realized in these discussions going forward? Obviously, things are being opened up and put on the table, not just the trade, but the other agenda. What's Canada's position about how this issue that's coming to the fore can produce more positive results on for the trilateral relationship?
Look, on the trilateral relationship, the biggest area clearly is NAFTA. I think it's important for people not to get ahead of themselves. It's important for us all to recognize that neither the Secretary of Commerce nor the USTR are yet confirmed. According to U.S. TPA authority, before entering into any kind of formal negotiation, the U.S. administration needs to have quite a long domestic consultation period. So we are quite far away from any concrete, specific discussions around our trilateral economic relationship, which is NAFTA. As far as NAFTA is concerned, the position of our government has been really clear from day one, which is that it is a very normal process for us to work with our trading partners on modernizing our trade agreements. My colleague Francois Philippe, even as we speak, is working on modernizing and updating our FTAs with Chile and Israel. By our count, we have modified NAFTA significantly 11 times since it entered into force. So that's a process that is familiar, and I think common sense tells us all absolutely essential. The economy changes, and so trade agreements have to keep up. So, if and when that discussion happens, we are absolutely prepared to take part in it. I really do see some real opportunities for us to have stronger, closer collaboration between our three North American countries. There's been a dialogue for some time on North American competitiveness, and I think there are opportunities to make our continent even more competitive in the global economy. And if we're able to seize those opportunities, that will achieve what I think is the core objective of our government, of Luis's government, and of the US government, which is more jobs and more growth for middle-class people and people working hard to join the middle class. You know, that is the core thing that brings us all together. And I think that it is very clear that there is work that we can do to do an even better job there. But I do want to underscore that our government's view, and I think this is a view broadly shared by Canadians, is NAFTA has already helped us all to achieve that goal. There's a lot more for us to do and a lot more opportunity, and that's going to be one of the things Luis and I talk about this afternoon.
Let me tell you something. Okay, what Christy is saying is absolutely right. There are yet no trade talks between the NAFTA partners. There's a reason for that. The U.S. is going through a particular process with its Congress under TPA rules. And also the Mexican government, what we're doing from our end is we are undergoing a consultation period. We've announced through the Ministry of the Economy that the Mexican government is conducting a consultation process, a 3-month consultation, where we want to hear from all the stakeholders on NAFTA. And it's going to be after that that we will be prepared to enter into any trade talks with the US and Canada. Why is this consultation important? First of all, because we acknowledge that NAFTA is a 23-year-old agreement. The world has changed, and certainly NAFTA can be improved. But more importantly is we are asking the stakeholders, what would you do to NAFTA to make it better? This is not about going to the past. How can we use NAFTA and the NAFTA talks to move towards the future, a better future for all NAFTA parties? And by the way, from the Mexican perspective, this includes Canadian companies, because there are very important Canadian companies and investments that have trusted Mexico and have put capital into Mexico. And we want to make sure that when we approach the trade talks, we keep in mind the interest of Canadian companies that are creating jobs and development in Mexico. So part of the consultation process is going to be about that. We just had a great meeting with auto parts companies from both Mexico and Canada, and we've asked them, what would you do to make NAFTA better? And we got some interesting ideas. And by the way, one of those is make life simpler to small and medium-sized companies. Why don't we use NAFTA to foster that? We should. We definitely should. And I don't think that's a contentious or confrontational issue. We will continue to that. We want to honor the trust of those that have invested, and we do not shy away from trade talks. We are a very open country. We've had free trade agreements with 46 nations now. We're in the process of negotiating trade agreements with Brazil and Argentina. We are modernizing our trade agreement, which is already 17 years old, with the European Union, just as Canada did. And we are already in conversations with some of the TPP partners that we don't have a bilateral trade agreement with. So we are very active. NAFTA is not our only focus. We have a very competent team of trade negotiators led by Secretary Guajardo, from whom you heard earlier this morning, and we embrace the process. We firmly believe that NAFTA can be better, for sure, and that's what we will be working when the appropriate time comes. That's not happening yet.
Given, as you both have said, that this is very preliminary, a number of cabinet positions in the U.S. have not been filled, key positions granted, and we understand the consultation processes going on in both places. Yet at the same time, for example, in Mexico, there have also the rhetoric has been have not ratcheted up. There have been some discussions, well, if it goes as bad as we think the U.S. may want it, let's have this very interesting discussion about Mexico's southern border with immigration. Let's have a discussion about DEA agents, et cetera, et cetera. So there must be, and some coming from the government, so there must be some reason why the Mexican government is having those, in certain sectors, is putting out those kinds of statements. In other words, there must be indications from Washington or some concern in Mexico that some of the worst fears of what the campaign rhetoric in the U.S. will be realized. Or am I misreading the statements from the government on that?
There's no secret that the campaign rhetoric was very damaging to the relationship, certainly. It was offensive, it was insulting, and that's something that will have to be addressed. But the only way to address that is through dialogue and through a lot of work and cooperation. That's exactly what we're doing. And remember, the relationship is very deep, is very robust, and a lot of the relationship is not about what people say in Washington or what people say in Mexico City. These are two societies that have integrated themselves through market process and through cultural process through many years, and that process cannot be stopped. So there are many things to talk about, and we're doing that in a respectful, in a constructive way. But we also acknowledge that there are some there's some very public, very significant differences that we need to work out. As long as we do it with full acknowledgement that we are two sovereign nations, and that we treat each other respectfully, and we approach any talks constructively, we will continue to do so. And that's what that's what we're hearing from Washington as well.
Well, Mr. Freeland, by the same token, there's the famous, or what's become infamous the last few weeks, mostly among pundits, some pundits in Canada, is the throw Mexico under the bus line. And that was discussed in the earlier panel today. Prime Minister Mulroney talked about the speciousness and the silliness and the weakness of taking such a posture. But would you like to make a comment about that in terms of the Canadian position approaching these negotiations, the bilateral and, of course, the trilateral relationship, that's the negotiations that lie before us?
Yeah, well, look, I've always been clear, our Prime Minister has always been clear on the importance of our relationship with Mexico. And that's one of the reasons that I was so keen to accept your invitation, Ken, that I personally urged Luis to come, that I'm very glad that my friend Ildefonso is here too. Our government has put a real priority, really from beginning in the election campaign, on our relationship with Mexico. We understand that we are two North American countries, and we have a lot in common, strong ties, and there is real benefit to making those ties even stronger. On the economic front, again, we have our bilateral economic relationship with Mexico. We have a bilateral economic relationship with the United States. We have a very important trade agreement that we too are partners in, as is the United States. And again, we are not, as I said earlier, we all collectively have to be, I think, quite careful not to get ahead of ourselves. There is no negotiating process yet initiated, and in fact, the United States does not yet have a team in place that could even begin those negotiations. So let's not put the cart before the horse, but we very much recognize that NAFTA is a three-country agreement, and were there to be any negotiations, those would be three-way negotiations, and we really value our partnership with Mexico there. So, I think that the meeting that we're going to have this afternoon will be a good opportunity for us to continue strengthening our bilateral relationship.
Let me say something about that, Ken, because I think there's been too much was made about a couple of comments that were frankly taken out of context. But if you look at the bilateral relationship between Mexico and Canada, it's actually a great relationship, not a good one. It's a great relationship. And particularly Prime Minister Trudeau and his team have been, since day one, very forthcoming in becoming closer to Mexico. Just think about the visa requirement. There was an important obstacle to the relationship, and from day one he said, I'm going to eliminate the visa requirement, and he just did that. And our president and the prime minister talk frequently. Actually, when he came out of Washington, one of the first calls that he made was to President Peña Nieto, and they shared their views. And this is an ongoing exchange. So I think it would be a significant mistake to characterize the relationship as something that is not just simply great. And we will continue working like that. We understand that there are some issues that in nature are strictly bilateral to the U.S.-Canadian relationship. We acknowledge that, just as Canada acknowledges that we have a bilateral relationship with the U.S. I'm sure that Chrystia will probably prefer to stay away about some of those aspects of the relationship, but that's the nature. That's the nature of it. And we have a bilateral relationship with Canada that is also very important. And we do $30 billion of trade each year. We should do more. We should find ways to do it. And when we enter trade talks, and those are going to be trilateral, one of our an interesting questions is how do we foster more trade between Canada and Mexico? We already have $25 billion of assets of Canadian companies invested in Mexico, and we welcome that, and we want to do more of that. So it's an outstanding relationship, and we have only felt very close communication and support from the Canadian government throughout this process.
Yeah, and if I could just add on the visa point, from our government's point of view, of course, we were glad to be strengthening our relationship with Mexico, but it's also, frankly, about self-interest. And we're already seeing indications that tourism is increasing, that flights between Canada and Mexico are increasing. So, you know, being more open to our Mexican partners, I'm glad that it makes Luis happy. But mostly, I want it to make everyone in this room happy, and I want there to be more business between Canada and Mexico, and therefore more jobs in Canada as a result. And we're seeing some early encouraging signs of that.
Talked about the consultation process going on in both countries on this. Mr. Videgaray, how much political room do you have to maneuver in Mexico right now, given the upcoming elections in the state, in the Estado de Mexico, and in the presidential elections a year and a half from now, with, you know, potentially the strongest challenge coming from further from the left, and one might say more of an economic nationalist kind of discussion going on in that sector. How much room do you feel like you have to wheel and deal on these negotiations going forward?
You know, Ken, Mexico's a democracy, and we have elections all the time. Every year we have an important election, so if we start thinking about elections as we deal with important issues like trade and our international relationship, we're going to get it wrong. So we got to keep those processes separate, understand that this is in the very nature of democracy to have elections, but those should be treated completely separate and should not interfere with our decision-making and our conversations with our partners abroad.
Minister, are you feeling any cross currents of internal pressures in Canada about the posture that Canada takes going forward in these NAFTA negotiations?
You know, I am feeling, actually, Ken, and I do want especially to say to all the Canadians here, thank you very much. I feel that our country right now is really united and really strong when it comes to standing up for our core economic national interest. I personally, like when I walk down the street now, like when I'm buying groceries in my neighborhood and stuff, people come up to me and give me a hug. And they say, you know, you go, girl. They do. And, you know, I've had great meetings with all of our stakeholders. I see Flavio here. I don't know if Don Walker is here too. You know, ranging from car sector and manufacturers to my friends in the softwood lumber industry, to agriculture, to banking. I feel our country really understands that right now is, frankly, a pretty volatile moment in geopolitics, in the world economy. And I think we as Canadians, sometimes we can be a little bit modest to a fault, and we can talk about how we're not good at being a united country. I really feel right now, when it comes to collaboration between government and business, between government very much and labor, our unions are very much at the table and very supportive, between the federal government, the provinces, the municipalities. I think we all really get, as a country, that this is a volatile moment, but it's also a moment that has a lot of opportunity for Canada, and that Canada is really distinctive today as a country that is standing up for, very proudly, the open society. We're open to trade. We're open to immigration, very much including immigrants from Muslim countries. And I think that that makes us both, for me, a country I'm very proud to live in and proud to represent internationally, but also, frankly, a great place to do business. And that is something I am hearing, both from Canadian business leaders and also from international business leaders. I mean, Ken, and I did want to bring this up today, last week was an important week because we had our meeting with President Trump. But the most important event for Canada last week was that the European Parliament ratified CETA, our free trade agreement with the European Union, which, I do want to offer a shout out to Steve Verheuel. Steve, could you just wave or something to show you're here? Steve is the chief negotiator of CETA. You did it, Steve. Thank you very much. And the fact that in 2017, our country was able, together with Europe, to actually get ratified what for Canada is actually our deepest, most ambitious trade agreement, in many ways deeper even than NAFTA, is both a huge practical benefit for businesses, all the businesses here, and also really an important statement about what Canada is able to do and how it is actually possible, even with lots of cross-currents, for us to have some successes in standing for the open society. And, for me, what is, a tremendous source of energy and optimism is I feel this is not about our government. The Conservatives launched CETA and they voted for it in the House of Commons last week. It's a cross-party thing, and I think that there is even, this is something which is about who we are as Canadians and who we are as people in the world. And I think it's a great, 2017 is our sesquicentennial, and it's going to be a great year for Canada.
I would like to open up for questions. We're trying to keep tight to this schedule. Minister Videgaray, was there something else that you would like to say before we open up to questions?
Let's do the questions.
Okay, here we go. I figured we'd get more than one hand up. There's a hand up over there. Oh, there's a hand, okay.
Minister Freeland, in order to modernize and strengthen the relationship between Canada and the United States, I wondered if you could comment on whether or not, as part of NAFTA discussions, they might include the de minimis level, which is the level below which duties and taxes enter into countries free of duties and taxes, Canada's being $20, the United States being $800. Thank you.
So, as I've said, there have, because of the fact that, I'm able to talk to my Mexican counterparts, they're confirmed in their roles in government. My U.S. counterparts have not yet been confirmed in their jobs. So we have had no specific NAFTA negotiations, and we couldn't. Our focus with the United States on economic issues, and we focused a lot on economic issues because, as everyone here knows, our economic relationship with the United States is very important to Canada. Our focus has been really explaining in some detail to the new administration, particularly to the White House, but I had a good conversation with Secretary Tillerson about this as well, and Harj Sajjan has spoken to Secretary Mattis about this, both of whom, by the way, both those two cabinet secretaries have strong personal connections to Canada. Our focus has been on really explaining the value of the Canada-U.S. economic relationship to the United States. Canadians are all familiar with the fact that we're smaller than the United States, not geographically, but in population, and so we think about them a little bit more than they think about us. And our focus has really been on saying, you know what, for 35 U.S. states, Canada is the top export market. When we went in to see Paul Ryan, I said, did you know that your district sells $1 billion worth to Canada every year? That was a number that really caught his attention. 9 million U.S. jobs depend on trade with Canada. So our focus has really been on making that broad and very important point and framing the discussion as it needs to be framed for the United States, that you might not think about Canada that much, and that's okay with us. We're not a vain country. We don't need you to wake up in the morning and say, oh, Canada. But we are a very, very important client of yours. And I think that we have been making some real progress in framing the discussion that way.
Ministers, regarding the G20 bond meeting last week, I think it's quite important that people think that one of the objectives of that is to forge new regulatory trade, new orders. What do you foresee in the coming days for that? If you see any challenges, any trend for that new order to be forged?
Yeah, so as Luis and I said, we were both in Bonn at the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, which was hosted by another former trade minister, Sigmar Gabriel, now the German foreign minister, but he was the Minister of Economy and actually was my counterpart on CETA and played a very big role there. I think, we talked a lot in that meeting about an issue that will be very familiar to Canadians as a focus of our government, which is the middle class in Western industrialized countries, and the need for governments to work harder to be sure 21st century technology-driven global capitalism works better for our middle classes. If I were a reporter, hello reporters, if I were still a journalist writing a summary of the Bonn meetings from my perspective, the fact that that is a shared concern of all the Western industrialized countries at the G20 table was very striking to me. We all sort of understand that this is a time of great opportunity, of great progress, amazing things are happening in the global economy, but also I think the technology revolution is an even more powerful driver of change. But that as governments, we have to work even harder to be sure that the benefits of that change actually are brought home to middle-class people, that people are getting good, well-paid jobs, that they have confidence their kids can get those jobs. And regulation is an important part of that conversation. And one of the things I think we have to do is, while being sure that our regulations keep us safe, which is the reason we have them, that they are not an impediment to innovation, not an impediment to trade, not an impediment to creating those jobs that are the core reason that we're here. Luis?
On the G20, let me just stress the following. I think an important consensus was to support a rules-based collective approach to common problems. And I didn't hear a single voice that was speaking against a multilateral approach to the big challenges of our days, including sustaining peace, reaching development, including the 2030 UN development goals, and other problems like climate change. I think in that sense, it was a very reassuring meeting. that there's a strong support for a multilateral framework approach based on rules.
Questions about North America, North American relationship?
More of a focus on the bilateral relationship between Canada and Mexico, since our American friends aren't yet ready to talk. What are the areas of greatest potential improvement and strengthening in our bilateral relationship as we look to increase trade from 30 billion up to higher numbers? And how can that help us to have greater alignment when the time does come for a trilateral discussion?
Well, I'd like to pick up on Luis's comments earlier. I think that there are real opportunities. I think we have a very strong foundation, and the number of people who have come today to talk about this relationship sort of reinforces that for me. But I think we have an opportunity really to do more in the directions where we're already working. I'd like us to see doing more trade. I'd like us to see more investment in both directions. Now I'd like us to see more tourism. So, you know, that's really where I think we need to go. And I do want to say, Luis mentioned the visas, so I have to mention the beef. Last June, when we had our Mexican visitors here, I think President Peña Nieto said to me on the third meal we had together, he said, "Are you guys going to serve us beef at every meal?" And we said, yes. You know, we have to really sort of make the point. So, you know, there are tons of trading opportunities, and I think that we're already pretty good at capitalizing on them, but there's a lot more that we can do.
Certainly, on the economic side of the relationship, there are many things that can get even better, both trade-wise and on investment. We'd like to perhaps buy more from Canada than what we buy from other places in the world, and that's something that is quite appealing to us. And also, we'd like to foster more Mexican investment in Canada, and more, of course, welcoming more investment from Canada into Mexico. In particular, there are many opportunities for Canada's pension funds to invest in infrastructure projects in Mexico. That's already happening, and that's a phenomenal investment opportunity, and we want to foster that and protect that. But there are other things in the Mexico-Canada relationship that are also quite important, that we're thinking that we are natural partners towards things that matter to both Mexicans and Canadians in the world. Things like climate change, things like promoting together the use of clean technologies in energy in a profitable way, or protecting the rights of vulnerable migrants, including children. We have many things that we care about together. And we can be great partners not only in our bilateral relationship, but how we approach these larger problems in the world, where we have shared values and share a vision.
And if I could just add one more additional issue that we're going to be talking about this afternoon, and where we have some really good conversations going already, is around Aboriginal people. As all the Canadians in the room will know, a priority for our government is reconciliation with Aboriginal people of Canada. I think all Canadians feel that, you know, while there's a lot that Canada has to be proud of, that's an area where we haven't done very well, and where we have a lot of wrongs to correct. Mexico is another country where Aboriginal issues are really important, and we have some great conversations and some bilateral work that we're doing on learning from each other's experiences.
The other thing that we'd like to see more is more Mexican students coming to Canada, where you have great schools, and also to see more Canadian students going to Mexico.
You have to stop complaining about the February weather, though, please. And it's so warm. Like, for us, you don't understand. Like, this weekend, my kids were, like, in their T-shirts outside.
It's just lovely.
Feel this is the beginning of summer.
It's fantastic.
Okay. Two very quick ones.
Since both ministers have mentioned your commitment or national commitments to open and free borders. If the Trump administration is successful in reinstituting a Muslim ban, are you going to be discussing joint opposition to this?
Let me tell you something, because I know that Christy has strong views on this. And we share some very important values, Canada and Mexico. Historically, Mexico has been a very welcoming country to those that need a home. Just think about the waves of, for instance, people from Spain during the Spain's Civil War, or Chileans that came to Mexico in large numbers during the Pinochet dictatorship, and many others. And Mexico has enriched itself through that, and we embrace that, and we will continue to do so. We believe in an open society and in an open world. While we acknowledge the U.S. or any other country's sovereign right to establish its own immigration policies, we are not in the business of dictating policies to others. We are sovereign nations, and we should fundamentally respect that principle. But regarding our policies, we are an open society, and very proud to be an open society.
Yeah, and I will just echo that. Canada's policy on immigration and on welcoming refugees of all faiths or of no faith at all are unchanged. And one aspect, and we're very, very proud, and I think it's important right now in the world for us to say that publicly, which we do at every opportunity. It was interesting being in Europe last week, in Strasbourg to talk about CETA, in Bonn with the foreign ministers. We had a meeting with Chancellor Merkel and her team in Berlin. Then the Prime Minister gave a speech in Hamburg, and then finally in Munich. We had one day with 4 cities in it. So in all of those conversations, it was really interesting to hear how important Canada's welcome of the Syrian refugees is to European countries. And they see that both as a statement of our values, but also as Canada chipping in and doing our part to solve a crisis which for the Europeans is very acute. And it was great to be able to say to the Europeans, yeah, Canada is stepping up and we're doing our share.
I shouldn't do this, but I will allow one more very quick question before I ask Jonathan Hausman to close down today's proceedings. So one more quick question.
Hello, Ministers. Shannon McCarthy from Ontario. Just had a question with regards to Professor Nunez's comment on the importance of speaking with younger generations and building that relationship and the discussion about relationships between Canada and Mexico. Do the two of you have comments on that?
Sure. Go ahead.
Please.
No, go ahead. See, we're so polite. We're Canadian.
Well, one of the true benefits of NAFTA is not economic; it's cultural. Because for younger generations, the U.S. and Canada have become a very natural, a very welcoming part of reality. And younger generations welcome that. So it's, but perhaps because of geography, it's not, Canada is probably not a reality that is perceived as much as we perceive our proximity to the U.S. And this is something that should be fostered. And as I said, educational exchanges and other cultural exchanges are quite important. Our relationship is not only an economic relationship. I think more fundamentally is a true friendship between two societies that should be closer because we have common values. Other than common interest, we have common values that we believe in. So it's I think that's more than anything, that's a great opportunity. And I think we're on the right track. But we should do definitely more, not only to be closer, but also to feel closer.
Yeah, and I would echo that. As Luis has said, focusing on people-to-people ties and on a stronger relationship there is definitely something that our government is very excited about. I think everyone knows that our Prime Minister is also his own youth minister. And he believes really strongly in the importance of engaging young people in all of our international relationships. As I said earlier, this is our 150th anniversary of Confederation, so I want to say to all our Mexican visitors, this is a great year to come visit Canada. You don't need a visa anymore, so no problems there, no excuses. And I think that that is a real opportunity, that area of, getting our kids involved is a real opportunity for expanding our relationship.
Well, in a discussion of high notes, let's end on that highest of notes. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today, again, for making the efforts to be here. Thank you very much.